She mocked me over dinner, drained my account without asking, and tried to ruin me online. Then she saw my face on the news, holding a check for $120 million. Her lawyer called me the next day. Before we begin, please subscribe, and I'd love to know, where in the world are you listening from? I thought I was being petty, until I saw the ribbon. The roast chicken was perfect, golden brown skin crackling just right, the way Martha used to make it. I'd been up since 6 that morning, peeling potatoes by hand, trimming green beans one by one. Father's Day deserved the effort, even if it was just Melissa coming over. Hell, especially because it was just Melissa. At 72, I don't get many chances to feel needed anymore. Retirement stripped away the daily purpose of fixing engines and solving problems under the hood. These days, my biggest accomplishment is organizing tools I no longer use and talking to Martha's photo in the hallway when the house gets too quiet. "She's bringing Eric," I muttered to Martha's smiling face as I straightened my collar. "Try to behave yourself." The doorbell rang at exactly 6:30. Melissa walked in wearing some designer blouse that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget, her heels clicking against the hardwood like a metronome counting down to something I couldn't name yet. Eric followed behind her, checking his Rolex before shaking my hand with the kind of firm grip that screamed, "I close deals." "Still rocking that 70s couch, huh?" Eric grinned, patting the brown fabric like he was petting a dog. "Vintage is making a comeback." Melissa laughed. Too loud, too bright. "Dad never throws anything away." "Right, Dad." I nodded and offered them wine. The bottle had cost me $43, which meant eating peanut butter sandwiches for lunch the rest of the week. But watching Melissa's face light up when she saw the label made it worth every penny. "Where's Jake?" I asked, setting down their glasses. "Club thing," Eric said, already scrolling through his phone. "You know how teenagers are." I didn't, actually. Jake rarely talked to me anymore, too busy with his private school friends and activities I couldn't afford to understand. But I nodded anyway. Dinner went smoothly enough. Melissa complimented the chicken. Eric talked about some business deal in Miami, and I listened like I always did. Then came dessert, and with it, the moment that would change everything. "Present time," Melissa announced, reaching into her purse with theatrical flair. She pulled out a folded piece of paper and tossed it across the table toward me like she was dealing cards. It landed next to my coffee mug, a crumpled lottery ticket. "Happy Father's Day, Dad. If you win, I get half. Fair's fair. I bought it." She was grinning like she'd just delivered the punchline to the world's funniest joke. Eric chuckled. $2 whole. Don't spend it all in one place, Stephen." The room went quiet for a beat, then filled with awkward laughter. I picked up the ticket, smoothed it out, and forced a smile. "Thanks, honey." But Melissa was already reaching behind her chair, pulling out a gift-wrapped box with gold ribbon and silk trim. The kind of packaging that costs more than the ticket she'd just thrown at me. "I haven't given Eric his yet," she said, her voice suddenly warm and reverent. She opened the box like she was unveiling the crown jewels. Inside were 2 cruise tickets. Mediterranean, luxury suite, first class. Even from across the table I could see the price printed in small letters at the bottom. $13,000. "Eric deserves something special," Melissa said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "He's done so much for our family." Eric beamed, took her hand, and kissed it like some kind of prince. "You spoil me, babe." "Some people give luxury," Melissa said, glancing meaningfully at the lottery ticket still clutched in my hand. "Others give chances." The laughter that followed was quieter this time. Everyone knew it had gone too far, but nobody was brave enough to say it. I gripped the ticket tighter, feeling the paper grow damp in my palm. My heart was sinking into my stomach, dragging 47 years of fatherhood down with it. 47 years of scraped knees kissed better, college tuition paid in overtime hours, and midnight phone calls answered without complaint. All of it reduced to a $2 joke. They left early. Melissa hugged me like she was hugging a stranger at a funeral. Eric shook my hand like a CEO closing a deal he'd already forgotten about. "Maybe next year, she'll get you something real," I heard him whisper as they walked to their BMW. I sat alone at the table afterward, staring at the ticket. The wine was half drunk. My plate was barely touched. I could hear Martha's voice in my head, clear as if she were sitting right beside me. "You raised her better than that." I crumpled the ticket into a ball and threw it in the trash. The next morning, I opened my online banking to check if the dinner expenses had cleared. What I saw made my blood freeze, a charge for $13,642 to something called Monarch Premium Travel. A company I'd never heard of, a purchase I'd never made, on a day I'd never left my house. She didn't take my money. She took my dignity with it. I stared at the screen for 10 full minutes, refreshing the page like somehow the numbers would change. $13,642, the exact amount of those cruise tickets, plus taxes and fees. My hands were shaking as I cross-referenced the date with my paper ledger, a habit Martha used to tease me about. Old-fashioned Stephen and his old-fashioned bookkeeping. But that old-fashioned system was about to save my sanity, because it proved what I already knew. I was home the entire day. I never left the house. I never authorized this purchase. Then it hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest. Melissa still had access to my account. I'd added her years ago after Martha passed, back when the grief was so thick I could barely remember to pay bills. "Just in case of emergencies," I'd told her. "Just until I get back on my feet." That was 3 years ago. This wasn't an emergency. This was theft. My finger hovered over her number for what felt like an hour. Part of me wanted to believe there was some explanation, some misunderstanding that would make sense of this nightmare. The other part of me, the part that had watched her throw a $2 gift at me like garbage, already knew the truth. She answered on the second ring, her voice bright and distracted. "Hey, Dad. Can this be quick? We're packing for the trip." The trip. My trip. Paid for with my money. "Melissa, I need to ask you about a charge on my account. $13,642 to Monarch Premium Travel." Silence. Then a sigh that sounded more annoyed than guilty. "Oh, that. Yeah, I used your account. It's for the cruise. Eric deserved something nice, and I knew you wouldn't spend the money anyway. It was just sitting there. Just sitting there. Like my life savings was some kind of decoration." "You didn't ask," I managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. "Dad, come on." "You wouldn't have spent it. You never spend money on anything fun. At least this way, it's going to good use." Good use. The words came out louder than I intended. "That's my money, Melissa. Money I worked 40 years to save." "And Eric has been more of a father figure than you lately," she snapped back. "He paid for Jake's school. He helped with our mortgage. He showed us what success looks like." The words hit me like physical blows. "I raised you," I said, my voice breaking slightly. "I gave everything so you could have a better life. And Eric elevated that life. Look, Dad, this is how families work. We help each other." "You're acting like I robbed a bank or something." "This is theft, Melissa." "No," she said, her voice cold now. "This is family. And if you can't understand that, then maybe you're not the man I thought you raised me to be." The line went dead. I sat there holding the phone for I don't know how long, listening to the dial tone like it might suddenly turn into an apology. But apologies don't come through dead phone lines, and they sure as hell don't come from daughters who think love is just another word for access to your bank account. I called Margaret, my sister, because I needed to hear a sane voice. She was horrified, offered to drive over immediately. offered to confront Melissa herself, but I told her no. I needed space. I needed time to think. I needed to figure out how the little girl who used to climb into my lap during thunderstorms had turned into someone who could steal from me and call it love. That night, I didn't sleep. I walked around the block 3 times at dawn, replaying the conversation over and over. Each time I hoped I'd remember it differently. Each time it got worse. The social media attack started the next morning. I was drinking coffee and trying to read the newspaper when my phone started buzzing. Text after text from numbers I didn't recognize. Facebook notifications I didn't understand. I'd barely figured out how to post pictures of the cars I worked on, let alone navigate whatever digital war was being waged in my name. Margaret called within the hour. "Stephen, you need to see this. Melissa posted something on Facebook." She read it to me over the phone, her voice getting angrier with every word. According to Melissa's post, I was guilty of elder financial abuse. I was withholding family funds out of spite. I was being vindictive and cruel to my only daughter during a difficult time in her life. The post was 3 paragraphs long, filled with phrases like toxic behavior and emotional manipulation. There was a photo attached, me at last Christmas, caught mid-sentence with a stern expression on my face. Out of context, I looked angry, cold, exactly the kind of man who might abuse his own child. Eric posted something too, Margaret continued, on LinkedIn, something about toxic legacies and breaking cycles of dysfunction. Within hours, people I'd known for decades were looking at me differently. Mrs. Henderson from down the street crossed to the other side when she saw me at the grocery store. Bob Patterson, who I'd fixed cars with for 20 years, wouldn't make eye contact when I nodded at him in the pharmacy. They were using my own life against me, turning every private moment into public evidence of my supposed cruelty. And the worst part? Some of it was working. People who didn't know me well enough to see through the lies were starting to believe them. That evening, I found myself standing over the trash can in the kitchen, staring down at that crumpled lottery ticket. It was still there, soggy from coffee grounds, stuck to a banana peel like some kind of pathetic metaphor for my entire relationship with my daughter. "Even the gift was stolen," I said out loud to Martha's photo. My voice echoed in the empty house. I picked up the ticket, smoothed it out as best I could, and memorized the numbers out of pure spite. 7, 14, 23, 35, 42, Powerball 18. Numbers that meant nothing to me, from a gift that meant even less. Then I crumpled it up again and threw it deeper into the trash, burying it under coffee filters and empty soup cans. That night, I deleted Melissa from my emergency contact list. It felt like erasing part of my own history, but it also felt necessary. I called the bank the next morning and revoked her access permanently. The customer service representative was professional but curious, probably wondering what kind of family drama required such drastic measures. "Just a precaution," I told her. "Things change." What I didn't tell her was that sometimes the people you trust most are the ones who hurt you worst. Sometimes the child you raised with love and sacrifice grows up to see you as nothing more than an ATM with a pulse. Sometimes family isn't about blood or history or shared memories. Sometimes it's just a password to access your wallet. 3 days later, I woke up early like always, poured my coffee like always, and flipped on the television just to fill the silence. The morning news was droning on about politics and weather when they cut to the lottery drawing from the night before. I wasn't really watching. I was thinking about changing the locks, thinking about maybe selling the house, thinking about starting over somewhere nobody knew my name or my story. Then the announcer's voice cut through my thoughts like a knife. Last night's Powerball numbers: 7, 14, 23, 35, 42. Powerball number 18. My coffee mug hit the floor and shattered. Hot liquid spread across the linoleum like spilled blood. Those were my numbers. The numbers from that soggy, crumpled ticket buried in my trash. The numbers from the $2 joke Melissa had thrown at me, like I was some kind of beggar. $120 million, sitting in my garbage can, covered in coffee grounds and shame. I threw away a joke. Life threw it back as a bombshell. For the longest time, I just stood there, staring at the broken mug. Coffee spreading across my kitchen floor like some kind of omen. The TV kept droning on about jackpot details and winner verification, but all I could hear was the sound of my own heartbeat hammering in my ears. 7, 14, 23, 35, 42, Powerball 18. I knew those numbers. I'd memorized them out of spite 3 days ago, burned them into my brain like a scar from Melissa's cruelty. But knowing them and believing them were two different things entirely. "This isn't real," I said out loud to Martha's photo. "This kind of thing doesn't happen to people like us." But the numbers on the screen didn't care about my disbelief. They sat there, cold and factual, while my entire world tilted sideways. I rushed to the kitchen trash can, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip the plastic rim. Coffee grounds scattered across the floor as I dug through banana peels, empty soup cans, and soggy paper towels. There at the bottom, stuck to a greasy napkin like some kind of miracle wrapped in garbage, was the ticket. I pulled it out with trembling fingers, bits of coffee filter clinging to the edges. The paper was stained and wrinkled, the ink slightly smudged from days of decomposing trash, but the numbers were still legible. Still mine. Still worth $120 million. I carried it to the sink like it was made of glass, washing it gently under cold water, while my heart tried to beat its way out of my chest. This crumpled piece of paper, this joke Melissa had thrown at me like I was some kind of charity case, was worth more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. The irony hit me like a freight train. She'd bought it with my stolen money, tossed it at me like garbage, then had the nerve to joke about taking half if I won. She never even thought I'd check the numbers. Why would I? It was just a $2 insult wrapped up as a gift. I called the Ohio Lottery hotline with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. The automated system walked me through a series of prompts that felt like they lasted forever. Press 1 for this, press 2 for that. Enter your numbers here. Finally, a computerized voice delivered the words that changed everything. You are holding the winning ticket for the $120 million jackpot. Please contact our claims office immediately. I sank to the floor, right there in my kitchen, the wet ticket clutched against my chest, and laughed until I cried. Or maybe I cried until I laughed. I couldn't tell the difference anymore. For the next hour, I couldn't move. I just sat at my kitchen table staring at the ticket like it might disappear if I looked away. Visions of that Father's Day dinner kept playing in my head like a broken movie reel. Melissa's theatrical presentation of the cruise tickets, Eric's smug grin, the way she'd flicked my gift across the table like it was contaminated. If you win, I get half, I whispered to myself, mimicking her voice. Fair's fair. I bought it. Well, she'd bought it with my money, and now I knew exactly what fair looked like. The next call was to the Ohio Lottery Commission. A woman named Janet Chen answered, her voice professional and calm in a way that made me feel like maybe this was real after all. She explained the verification process, the security measures, the absolute necessity of bringing the ticket in person for authentication. How long does verification take? I asked. For a jackpot this size, 48 hours, she said. We need to run it through several security checks. Can you come in tomorrow morning? I put the ticket in a Ziploc bag, then inside a hardcover book, then into the locked drawer where I kept Martha's jewelry and our important papers. It felt surreal, protecting something that had been garbage just hours before. That night, I called Margaret. "Stephen, it's almost midnight. Are you okay?" "I won," I said simply. "Won what?" "The lottery. The ticket Melissa gave me. $120 million. Silence. Then, "Stephen Woods, if you're having some kind of breakdown, I'm coming over right now." "I'm not having a breakdown. Maggie, I'm holding the winning ticket." I could hear her moving around, probably getting dressed. "I'm coming over." "No," I said firmly. "Not yet. I need to verify it first. I need to be sure." Does Melissa know? That was the million-dollar question. Or rather, the $120 million question. "Not yet," I said. "And she's not going to. Not until I decide what to do about it." The next morning, I drove downtown in my beat-up 2006 Toyota Corolla, wearing the same navy suit I'd worn to Martha's funeral. It was the only formal clothing I owned, and it felt appropriate somehow, like I was burying my old life and preparing for something entirely new. The Ohio Lottery Commission building was all glass and steel, buzzing with quiet energy and serious-looking people in expensive suits. I felt like a trespasser in my old suit and discount shoes, but Janet Chen met me at reception with a warm smile and a firm handshake. "Mr. Woods, I'm Janet. Thank you for coming in." She led me to a secure room where multiple people examined the ticket under magnifying glasses and special lights. They scanned barcodes I didn't even know existed, checked serial numbers against computer databases, and asked me detailed questions about where and when I'd purchased it. "Actually," I said, "my daughter bought it. It was a Father's Day gift." Janet raised an eyebrow but didn't comment. Professional discretion, I suppose. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, she looked up from her computer screen and smiled. "Mr. Woods, I'm pleased to confirm that you are holding an authentic winning ticket for our $120 million jackpot." The words hit me like a physical force. Real. Verified. Mine. Janet handed me a thick security packet filled with advice about privacy protection, asset management, and legal consultation. She explained tax implications, payment options, and the importance of keeping this information confidential until I was ready to go public. "Many winners choose private ceremonies," she said, "but some prefer public verification for transparency reasons. You have time to decide." I left the building with a different relationship to the world. Every person I passed on the street, every car in the parking lot, every building I drove past, none of them knew that the old man in the Toyota was worth more than most of them would earn in their entire lifetimes. But by the time I pulled into my driveway, a black BMW was already waiting for me. Melissa burst out of the passenger seat before Eric had even turned off the engine. Her eyes were wide with something between desperation and greed, and she was practically vibrating with nervous energy. "Dad, is it true?" she said, grabbing my arm before I could even get out of my car. "Did you really win?" Behind her, Eric emerged from the driver's seat with his phone already in his hand, that familiar smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. "We heard from someone inside the Lottery Commission," Melissa continued breathlessly. "They said someone from this address claimed a $120 million ticket." I looked at both of them, my daughter who had stolen from me, and her husband who had encouraged it, and felt something cold and hard settle in my chest. "Remember what I said?" Melissa pressed on before I could answer. "Half is mine. Everyone heard me say it at dinner. That's got to count for something, right?" "Legally speaking," Eric added, stepping closer with his phone angled like he was recording. "She purchased the ticket. The gift exchange was just symbolic. In court we could argue." "Get out of my house," I said quietly. "Dad, come on," Melissa laughed nervously. "We're family. We can work this out." I said get out. But Eric was already filming, circling us like some kind of predator. "This is going to make great evidence," he said. "Elderly man refuses to honor verbal agreement with his own daughter. The jury's going to love this." The jury's going to love the part where you stole $13,000 from my bank account, too, I replied calmly. I've got documentation for that. Melissa's face went white. Eric stopped filming. That was different, she stammered. That was family business. So is this, I said, walking toward my front door. And my family business says you need to leave. Now. They left, but not quietly. Eric shouted threats about lawyers and lawsuits. Melissa screamed about ingratitude and abandonment. The neighbors probably heard every word, but I didn't care anymore. I had bigger problems to worry about than neighborhood gossip. That night, as I sat in my quiet house holding a verified winning ticket worth $120 million, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Mr. Woods, this is William Johnson. I was there that night. I saw what happened. Can we talk? William Johnson, Eric's father. The man who had sat quietly in the corner during that disastrous Father's Day dinner, watching his son and daughter-in-law tear me apart for their own amusement. What could he possibly want? Sometimes your enemy's father is the only man brave enough to tell the truth. The message from William Johnson kept me awake all night. I'd met Eric's father exactly twice. Once at Melissa's wedding, and again at that disastrous Father's Day dinner. Both times, he'd struck me as the kind of man who measured his words carefully, spoke only when he had something important to say. The kind of man who didn't text strangers at midnight unless the situation was desperate. His message included a time and place: Murphy's Diner, 9 a.m. I could have ignored it, could have blocked the number and pretended this whole nightmare would solve itself. But something in my gut told me this conversation might be the key to everything that came next. Murphy's Diner was the kind of place that hadn't changed since 1953. Red vinyl booths, black and white checkered floors, and coffee strong enough to wake the dead. The breakfast crowd was mostly retirees and blue-collar workers grabbing eggs before their shifts. I spotted William Johnson immediately, sitting by the window in a perfectly tailored navy suit that probably cost more than my car. He stood when he saw me, extending his hand with the kind of formal courtesy you don't see much anymore. Mr. Woods, thank you for coming. I know this must seem strange. I shook his hand and slid into the booth across from him. Up close, I could see where Eric got his sharp features, but William's eyes held something his sons never had: genuine remorse. I have something to say, and I need you to hear it, he began without preamble. I was there that night. I saw everything that happened at your dinner table. I remember, I said carefully. You were quiet. Too quiet, he replied, his jaw tightening. I should have spoken up when I watched my son and your daughter humiliate you. I should have said something when she threw that lottery ticket at you like you were some kind of beggar. The waitress came by, and we both ordered coffee. William waited until she was gone before continuing. There was no agreement about splitting any winnings, he said firmly. That ticket was a gift, plain and simple. A cruel one, maybe, but still a gift. What happened after? The way they're trying to rewrite history. It's shameful. I studied his face, looking for signs of manipulation or hidden agenda. Why are you telling me this? William sighed, suddenly looking every one of his 68 years. Because I didn't raise my son to be a parasite, and I sure as hell didn't raise him to marry someone who would steal from her own father. You know about the bank account? I know about all of it, he said grimly. The $13,000, the social media attacks, the threats about lawsuits. Eric came to me yesterday asking for money to hire lawyers. When I asked him why, he told me the whole story, like he was proud of it. William pulled out his phone and showed me a draft Facebook post. I read it twice, my eyes widening with each sentence. It was written with surgical legal clarity, detailing the entire Father's Day dinner from the perspective of an independent witness. Every cruel word Melissa had spoken, every dismissive gesture Eric had made, every moment of my humiliation laid out like evidence in a court case. "You're really going to post this?" I asked. "Already did," he said, tapping his screen. "About 5 minutes ago." I watched as his post went live, complete with his full name and professional credentials. William Johnson wasn't just Eric's father. He was a respected business leader, a board member at 3 different companies, and someone whose word carried weight in Columbus's business community. Within minutes, the post started gaining traction. Shares from other business leaders, comments from people who knew William's reputation for honesty and integrity. People who had stayed silent during Melissa's social media campaign were suddenly finding their voices. "About time someone told the truth," read one comment. "Always knew Eric was a fraud," said another. "Melissa seemed entitled at the wedding. This explains a lot." My phone started buzzing with notifications. Messages from neighbors who had been avoiding me, apologies from people who had believed Melissa's lies, expressions of support from friends I thought I'd lost forever. The tide was turning, and it was turning fast. "Why risk your reputation for this?" I asked William. He looked out the window at the morning traffic, choosing his words carefully. "I've already lost 2 board positions because of Eric's recent behavior. His investment firm is being investigated for some questionable practices. My name gets dragged through the mud every time his name appears in the business section." He turned back to me, his eyes hard. "I built my reputation over 40 years of honest work. I'm not going to let my son's greed destroy what I've spent my life building." We finished our coffee in comfortable silence, 2 fathers who understood the pain of watching their children choose the wrong path. As we prepared to leave, William handed me a business card. "If you need character witnesses, legal support, anything at all, you call me," he said. "What they did to you was wrong, and I'm going to make sure people know it." That afternoon, Janet Chen called from the lottery office. "Mr. Woods, we have a decision to make about your prize ceremony. Would you prefer a private check presentation, or would you like to make it public?" I thought about William's post, about the support flooding in from people who now knew the truth, about Melissa and Eric's attempts to steal not just my money, but my dignity. "Public," I said firmly, "as public as possible." "Excellent," Janet replied. "We can schedule it for Friday at 10 a.m. Our main conference room holds about 50 people, and we always invite local media for jackpots this size." I spent the next 2 days preparing. I dug out my Navy funeral suit again, polished my shoes until they gleamed, and dusted off the only decent tie I owned. Ironically, one Melissa had given me 5 years ago, back when she still seemed to love me. I also prepared a short speech, nothing bitter or vindictive, just the truth delivered with the dignity they had tried to take from me. Friday morning arrived gray and drizzly, but the lottery office was buzzing with activity. Reporters with cameras, lottery officials in crisp suits, photographers adjusting their equipment. I walked in wearing my best clothes and my hard-earned pride, carrying myself like the winner I'd become. Janet welcomed me warmly, introducing me to various officials and media representatives. The ceremony itself was simple but dignified. They presented me with an oversized check, the kind you see in commercials, while cameras flashed and reporters scribbled notes. "Mr. Woods," one reporter called out, "how does it feel to win $120 million? "Overwhelming," I replied honestly. "I'm still getting used to the idea." "What are your plans for the money?" I was about to answer when the back doors of the conference room burst open with a bang that silenced the entire crowd. Melissa stormed in, her face flushed with rage and desperation, shoving past security guards who were too surprised to stop her immediately. "That ticket was mine!" she screamed, pointing an accusatory finger at me while cameras swung around to capture the scene. "He's stealing from me. I bought that ticket. I said we'd split it." Behind her, Eric followed with his phone out, sweating and panicked, trying to record everything while staying out of the security guard's reach. The room erupted. Reporters surged forward, cameramen jockeyed for better angles, and lottery officials moved to restore order. But through all the chaos, I remained calm. I stepped away from the microphone, looked directly at Melissa with the poise of a man who had nothing left to hide, and said in a voice that cut through the noise, "If you want the truth about what happened, ask William Johnson. He was there that night, and he's already told it." The reporters immediately started shouting questions at Melissa about William's post, about the bank account theft, about her social media attacks. She tried to answer, tried to spin her version of events, but the damage was already done. The truth was out there, backed by an independent witness whose reputation was beyond reproach. Security finally reached her, gently but firmly escorting both her and Eric from the building while the cameras rolled. As the doors closed behind them, I heard Eric shouting something about lawyers and lawsuits, but his voice was lost in the general commotion. I returned to the microphone, straightened my tie, the one she had given me, and finished my interrupted answer. "My plans for the money." I repeated the reporter's question. "I plan to use it wisely, to help people who deserve help, and to make sure no one ever again mistakes my kindness for weakness." The applause that followed was genuine, warm, and completely unlike the polite acknowledgement I'd expected. These people had just witnessed a family drama play out in real time, and they understood exactly what kind of man was standing before them. As I left the building that day, walking past the cameras and reporters with my head held high, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, the satisfaction of being completely, publicly, undeniably right. The war wasn't over yet, but I had just won the most important battle. She didn't come back to apologize. She came to collect. The morning after the lottery ceremony, I was sitting at my kitchen table reading the front page of the Columbus Dispatch. There I was, larger than life, holding that oversized check with a smile that looked more confident than I felt. The headline read, "Local retiree wins $120 million jackpot after family drama." They'd managed to capture the whole story in one photograph, dignity triumphing over greed. I was halfway through the article when I heard it, a soft knock on my front door. Not the aggressive pounding I'd come to expect from Melissa's recent visits, but something almost hesitant, uncertain, completely out of character for my daughter. Through the peephole, I saw her standing on my porch, but she looked different. Her usually perfect hair was disheveled, her makeup smeared around red, puffy eyes. She was wearing jeans and an old sweater instead of her typical designer clothes, and she kept glancing around nervously like she was afraid someone might see her there. I opened the door slowly, keeping the chain latch engaged. "What do you want, Melissa?" "Can we talk?" Her voice was barely above a whisper, nothing like the commanding tone she'd used during our previous confrontations. "Please, Dad. Just 5 minutes." Against my better judgment, I let her in. She walked through the house, slowly, touching familiar objects like she was seeing them for the first time in years. The ceramic bowl Martha had made in a pottery class, the family photos lining the hallway, the old rocking chair where I used to read to her when she was small. "I'll make tea," I offered, more out of habit than hospitality. "That would be nice," she said, settling into the same kitchen chair she'd occupied during that disastrous Father's Day dinner. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. As I prepared the tea, she began talking. Her voice was different, softer, more vulnerable than I'd heard in years. "I'm sorry for everything, Dad. The posts, the scene at the lottery office, all of it. I was scared. That money, it made me crazy." Her hands were shaking as she accepted the cup, real trembling, not the theatrical gestures I'd grown accustomed to. For a moment, she almost looked like the little girl who used to run to me when thunderstorms frightened her. "Eric's been under a lot of financial pressure," she continued, staring into her tea, like it held answers to questions she was afraid to ask. "His investment firm has been losing clients for months. We're in debt, Dad. Serious debt." I sat across from her, saying nothing. After 47 years of parenting, I'd learned when to listen and when to speak. "We're behind on the mortgage," she continued, her voice getting smaller with each admission. "Private school tuition for Jake, credit card payments, the country club fees. It all adds up to almost $400,000. $400,000. More money than I'd made in 5 years of working, and they'd managed to spend it faster than they could earn it." "Eric pushed me to use your account," she said, finally meeting my eyes. "I didn't want to, but he kept saying you'd never miss it, that you'd understand if you knew how desperate we were." The victim act was well rehearsed, but there were cracks in the performance. She was genuinely scared, genuinely desperate, but I could still see the calculation behind her tears. "What do you want from me, Melissa?" She reached across the table and took my hand, just like she used to do when she was a child, asking for something she knew she probably couldn't have. "All we need is $2 million, she said softly. "That would settle the house, save Eric's business, and pay for Jake's education through college. You'd still have over $100 million, Dad. You wouldn't even miss it. $2 million. She said it like it was pocket change, like it was nothing more than the cost of a nice dinner. "You still have a grandson who loves you," she continued, her grip tightening on my hand. "Jake asks about you all the time. He doesn't understand why we haven't been visiting." That hit harder than I expected. Jake was the only innocent party in this whole mess, and they were using him as emotional leverage. But then the memories came flooding back. Not the manufactured desperation of this moment, but the pattern that had been building for years. Melissa as a teenager, manipulating curfews with tears and promises she never kept. Melissa in her 20s, maxing out the emergency credit card I'd given her, and then disappearing for months. Melissa as a young mother, gradually replacing love with expectation, affection with transaction. Every apology followed by a bigger ask. Every crisis solved with my money, only to be replaced by a new crisis that somehow required even more. I gently pulled my hand away. "You didn't just spend money, Melissa. You tried to destroy my reputation when you didn't get your way. I was desperate. You stole from me," I continued calmly. "You mocked me in front of your husband. You threw a $2 gift at me like I was some kind of charity case. Then you tried to turn the whole community against me when I wouldn't roll over and accept it." Her demeanor started to shift. The vulnerability was fading, replaced by something harder and more familiar. "You're really going to let your own daughter lose her house?" she asked, her voice gaining an edge. "You're going to let your grandson get kicked out of his school? I'm not responsible for your financial decisions, Melissa." "Don't expect us at Thanksgiving," she snapped, the mask finally slipping completely. "Or Christmas, or Jake's graduation. Don't expect to be part of our lives at all if you can't help us when we need it most." There it was, the real Melissa, the one who measured love in dollars and saw family as nothing more than an untapped resource. "I'm not abandoning you," I said quietly. "I'm holding you accountable." She stared at me for a long moment, probably calculating whether tears or anger would be more effective. When she realized neither would work, she stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "This isn't over," she said, all pretense of vulnerability gone. "Eric's already talking to lawyers. We'll prove I had a right to half of that ticket." "Good luck with that," I replied, not rising from my chair. William Johnson's testimony should make for interesting reading. She slammed the door so hard that Martha's china rattled in the cabinet. That evening, I did something I'd been putting off for weeks. I opened my phone, scrolled to Melissa's contact, and pressed a button I'd never thought I'd have the strength to press. Block. It felt like closing a door in my soul. But it also felt like stepping into fresh air after being trapped in a suffocating room. 2 months passed in relative peace. I sold the house in Columbus, too many memories, too many neighbors who knew my business, and bought a small property in Dayton, Ohio. It was quiet, tree-lined, and anonymous. Nobody recognized me there. Nobody asked uncomfortable questions about my family situation or my newfound wealth. For the first time in years, I woke up each morning without wondering what fresh crisis would be waiting in my voicemail. I found a closed auto shop on the outskirts of town, Henderson Classic Auto Restoration. The owner had died, and his kids just wanted to get rid of it. The building was solid, the equipment was good, and the price was fair. I bought it outright, renovated the office space, and hired 3 local mechanics who knew their way around classic cars. Wood's Classic Auto Restoration opened on a Tuesday in October. By Thursday, we had our first customer, a 1969 Camaro that had been sitting in someone's barn for 20 years. By the end of the month, we were booked solid through Christmas. But the shop was just the beginning. I also established the Strong Fathers Foundation, a charity dedicated to helping single fathers who were struggling to provide for their children. Legal fees for custody battles, school supplies for kids whose dads were working 2 jobs, therapy costs for families dealing with divorce or loss, the kinds of expenses that could destroy a good man's ability to be a good father. The first check I wrote was to cover 6 months of daycare for a guy named Marcus, whose ex-wife had disappeared, leaving him to raise twin toddlers on a warehouse worker's salary. The second went to pay for a custody lawyer for Tom, whose ex was trying to prevent him from seeing his daughter. Every check felt like a small victory against the kind of people who measure love in dollars and see family as nothing more than a business transaction. One evening in December, I was driving past the community center where the foundation had just installed a new playground. There was a bronze plaque by the entrance. Donated by the Strong Fathers Foundation, because every child deserves a dad who never gives up. I pulled over to read it again, feeling something I hadn't experienced in months. Pure, uncomplicated pride. That's when I noticed the figure sitting on a bench across the street. Someone in a dark hoodie, face hidden in shadow, watching the community center. Watching me. My heart started racing. Was it Melissa? Eric? Some private investigator they'd hired to follow me? I sat in my car for 10 minutes, watching the watcher, before finally getting out and walking across the street. The figure didn't move as I approached, didn't try to hide or run away. "Can I help you?" I called out when I was about 20 feet away. The person looked up, and I saw the face of a teenager, probably 16 or 17, with tired eyes and the kind of hollow expression that comes from too much adult responsibility too soon. "You're the lottery guy," he said. It wasn't a question. "I'm Stephen Woods," I replied. "And you are?" "Jake," he said quietly. "Jake Johnson, Melissa's son, my grandson, the innocent victim in all of this mess, sitting alone on a bench in the December cold, watching the good his estranged grandfather was doing in the world. My fortune didn't buy peace. My boundaries did." "Jake," I said softly, my heart hammering against my ribs. "What are you doing here?" He looked up at me with eyes that held too much pain for someone his age. "Mom doesn't know I'm here. She thinks I'm at basketball practice." I sat down on the other end of the bench, giving him space but staying close enough to talk. The December air was cold enough to see our breath, and Jake was shivering in just a hoodie and jeans. "How long have you been sitting here?" "About an hour," he said, pulling the hood tighter around his face. "I wanted to see what you were doing with the money. Mom and Eric keep saying you're being selfish, but this—" He gestured toward the playground where kids were still playing despite the cold. "This doesn't look selfish." Smart kid. He'd inherited something good from somewhere in the family tree. "Are you okay, Jake? I mean, really okay?" He was quiet for a long moment, watching a father push his daughter on a swing. "We had to move," he finally said. "Smaller house, different neighborhood. I had to change schools. Mom cries a lot when she thinks I'm not listening." My chest tightened. Whatever else Melissa had done, she was still his mother. And he was still an innocent kid, caught in the middle of adult problems. "I'm sorry," I said, and I meant it. She showed me the Facebook posts, he continued. Yours and Great-Grandpa Johnson's. I remember that dinner. I remember how mean she was to you. Great-Grandpa Johnson. William had earned that title, honestly. Your mom is going through a hard time, I said carefully. Sometimes good people make bad choices when they're scared. Jake looked at me with the kind of direct stare that cuts through adult nonsense. She stole from you, didn't she? I could have lied, could have protected his image of his mother, but this kid deserved honesty. Yes, she did. And now she's mad because you won't give her more money. That's about the size of it. He nodded like that confirmed something he'd already figured out. I don't want her money, he said firmly. I mean, your money. I don't want any of it. Why not? Because it's not mine, and because... He paused, struggling with words that were too big for his 17 years. Because I see what money does to people. It made Mom crazy. It made Eric mean. I don't want to be like that. This kid was going to be all right. Whatever mistakes Melissa and Eric had made, they'd somehow raised a son with integrity. What do you want, Jake? I want to know my grandpa, he said simply. Not the lottery winner, not the guy with all the money. Just my grandpa. For the first time since this whole nightmare began, I felt tears coming. Good tears, the kind that wash away pain instead of adding to it. I'd like that too, I said. We exchanged phone numbers, his personal one, not the family plan that Eric controlled. We agreed to meet the following Saturday at the auto shop, where I could show him some of the cars we were working on. As he got up to leave, Jake turned back to me. Grandpa, I'm glad you won, not because of the money, but because now Mom can't pretend she's better than you anymore. 6 months later, Jake was spending most weekends at the shop, learning to restore classic cars and earning honest money for honest work. He'd gotten a job at a local grocery store and was saving up for community college. He wanted to study business, he said, but the right kind of business, the kind that helped people instead of taking advantage of them. Melissa never contacted me directly, but I heard through Jake that she and Eric had gotten divorced. The financial pressure had been too much, and Eric's investigation had turned into actual charges. He'd lost his license and was facing possible jail time. She'd moved in with her mother and gotten a job at a real estate office. Not the glamorous life she'd been living, but honest work. Maybe that was what she'd needed all along. Wood's Classic Auto Restoration was featured in Ohio Classic Car magazine. The Strong Fathers Foundation had helped over 50 families and was receiving donations from people across the state. Jake was thriving, working on a 1972 Chevelle that would be his when he turned 18. One evening, as I was locking up the shop, I found an envelope slipped under the office door. No return address, no name on it. Inside was a $100 bill and a handwritten note, for every father who never gave up. The handwriting looked familiar, but I didn't investigate. Some gifts are better left anonymous. I stood outside the shop in the quiet evening air, looking up at stars visible above Dayton's modest skyline. The air smelled like motor oil and possibility. For the first time in years, I felt completely at peace. I'd learned something important through all of this. The richest thing you can own isn't money or property, or even family that loves you unconditionally. The richest thing you can own is the silence of those who once tried to steal your voice, and the respect of those who see you for who you really are. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even. Sometimes it's building a life they can't touch, helping people they'll never help, and becoming the kind of person they could never understand. The lottery ticket had been worth $120 million. But my dignity, that was priceless.